I'm Naufel, President and co-founder at QueerTech. From its inception, QueerTech is striving to increase LGBTQ2S+ representation in tech. And one of the ways we do that is by creating a space for our community and tech companies to come together. On April 8th, QueerTech is hosting a national virtual job fair using a platform that will allow our participants and partners to connect and book a 10-minute conversation throughout the afternoon. Participants will also have the opportunity of multiple workshops to choose from. Companies like Unity Technologies, Wealthsimple, Sage, Accenture, and RBC are joining us because they believe in the diversity of perspective and experiences that QueerTech and our community can bring to their companies. Come find your next job opportunity with us on April 8th. Register today.
Gosh, I can never get used to myself on the screen. Good afternoon, cuties. Welcome to QT Café, QT Connect Cafe, where we tell stories about everything queer and tech. It is spring here officially in Montreal. It's a gorgeous day. I hope you're watching us on your phone in the park as you eat your lunch, because I would do the same. I'm Naufel, co-founder at QueerTech, and your host today. As you know, I'm based in Montreal, Teotihuacan, and I would like to begin by acknowledging that QueerTech is located on unceded Indigenous lands. The Kenya-Kenaha Nation is recognized as the custodian of the lands and waters on which we gather today. And as usual, a very special thank you to our QT annual partners, Sage, that recently joined us. Unity Technologies, been a long supporter with VanHack, SpaceSafe, and Local Logic and Breed Life. As you all know, the job board is live and you can register if you're interested. We've been adding some exciting companies that are joining our network of partners. So check out queertech.org/jobs for if you're looking for jobs in tech. And as you know from the video that we've done earlier, QueerTech is hosting the first national LGBTQ+ virtual job fair, part of our careers program. And our goal is always to create a space for our community and our partners to connect. It is a virtual job fair. April 8th, you see the details on the banner down here. It's from 1 to 5 p.m. ET. Save the date. You can actually register. So anyone who's a participant, and if either you're looking for a job or you're looking to advance your career in tech, you can register on our website, queertech.org, or you can see the link in there. So I also want to thank always our supporters and everyone who donates to QueerTech. It means so much to us. This is how we are a volunteer-based organization. And so the way we keep going is really by supporting our programs. You can donate to QueerTech, queertech.org/support. And as usual, before we get started with our guests, for those who have questions or comments throughout the duration of our live stream, you can write your question on the comment box on your social media outlet you're watching us on. You can also tag anyone who's looking for a job in tech or looking to advance their career in tech and need directions or inspirations or just a little motivation to get you through the day. And just be aware that any questions or comments that you put will be shown on this screen. So I know you're all excited for the big moment to announce our guest. And our guest today is a B2B content marketer at Passbase, an identity verification company with offices in Berlin and New York City, two of my favorite cities in this world. She is a board member at Yarrow Intergenerational Society for Justice, based in Vancouver's Chinatown, and Planet Ally, a global LGBTQ travel and human rights advocacy platform. I am very excited, and I want you also to be excited to welcome Athena Lam to the show. You may reveal yourself. Hi, don't you feel like a star when Andy does all these?
Glory to tech.
Absolutely, I love it. Athena, welcome to QT Connect, and thank you for answering to our invitation. And how are you?
Well, firstly, thank you for having me. I am great. I'm at the end of my working day in Berlin, so very happy to be connecting back across the pond and to you back in Canada.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for answering. Very excited for our conversation. I always have so many questions for our guests, and hopefully we'll get to dig into so many of them throughout this conversation. And, I'd like to kind of get us started to tell us a little bit more about yourself, about your pronouns. I know you also have a position on pronouns. We can also touch base on that. I love it. So tell us more about yourself.
Yeah, so I'm Athena. I use she, her pronouns. That's more by convenience because I was assigned female at birth. And the opinion that you had mentioned, Naufel, I'll quickly gesture to. It's that I speak Chinese. That's my other mother tongue. And conveniently, it has ambiguous pronouns. And so as a result, I don't think I've had as much of a crisis, at least for one language, over what to use. And I think that that's a really good meditation on how language shapes our understanding of gender. Of course, gender is expressed in so many ways. And I suppose if there's any of your guests who are interested in continuing the conversation, they're more than welcome to hit me up on Twitter.
Absolutely. I want to know. Definitely hit you up because I want to learn more about because it's interesting, right? We had another guest, Jared, who's Indigenous person from Canada, and we were talking about this. And also in Indigenous culture, there's more than two genders, you know. And so I think there were 5 or 7, I forgot, but it was interesting, right? And I think as you look at ancient cultures have existed for a long time and maybe have not been impacted by religion, Christianism, how they evolved, but a whole different conversation. Getting sidetracked already. Awesome. So, tell us a little bit. I know you're in Berlin. I'm really excited to talk to you about Berlin a little bit. We won't go into a lot of details, but tell us more about yourself. What do you do? And just kind of a quick summary.
Yeah, so the quick summary of where I am now in life is that I am a B2B content marketer. I tend to specialize in more technical products because I really like working with engineers and people who specialize in building things with an attention to the behind the scenes craft. And I do not have a technical background. My undergraduate degree was in East Asian Studies at the University of Toronto. Wow. So I've come pretty far away from my degree. And at the same time, I actually feel that it is applicable every day today. And maybe we can talk about that a little bit later, because my journey to content marketing is a little bit circuitous. I'd started out in nonprofits and events and then impact investing and then startups. And now I'm where I am.
Wonderful. And so definitely, again, a lot of questions I have in there, but let's go back to the beginning. With your background, I'm curious to hear where were you born? Where did you grow up? Where did you go to school? And we'll touch base about university. You told us what did you study. So just want to kind of go through that journey briefly.
Yeah, for sure. So I was born in Vancouver, Canada. And then I grew up there, actually in the same house until I moved to Toronto for undergraduate. And so I was at the downtown campus at U of T. So I studied there for 3 years. And then I moved to Hong Kong right after graduation. So I had done my East Asian Studies degree with the intention of going to work in East Asia. And my logic at the time was that you can learn business skills through working. So if you wanted to do business development, for example, I didn't see the need to study business administration because eventually you will learn on the job. What you cannot make up for is the conceptual understanding of the world. And so that's why I decided to do a degree in East Asian Studies to better understand the peoples and the cultures that I was hoping to interact with. And so then I moved to Hong Kong, had a very, in retrospect, rude culture shock, but I didn't even realize it at the time. So I speak Cantonese, but my Cantonese is much better than it was when I first moved back.
Yeah.
And so I worked for a year, quickly got bored. So then I decided to work and do a master's degree and organize a TEDx event because I was a very frustrated educator. And then after that, I went to London for a year to do another master's degree in international development. And then it's a timing thing, but it just so happened that that year, the UK stopped granting work visas for its graduate students. And so as a result, even though that was 2012. So had I not delayed my program by a year, I actually would have still had a 2-year work visa. And because of those circumstances, I did not manage to stay in the UK. And so I returned to Hong Kong at the casual invitation of a friend who was like, well, you can't find a job anyway. Why don't you come back and help us do the TEDx event that we started? And again, by circumstance, I invited the wrong person to a conference that I had tickets for. And incidentally, she was like, why don't we actually have a lunch and get to know each other? Because she was the person who replaced me at my old job when I left Hong Kong. And then I ended up replacing her in her old job. And that's how I ended up in impact investing in Hong Kong in an NGO. And that was 7-8 years ago now.
Yeah.
So it was a emerging industry, really a baby industry at that time. And so quickly one outgrows the job. And at the same time, I also discovered a lot of things. For example, that you should never trade your health for work. I had carpal tunnel that was so bad, I actually couldn't sleep at night. And that's when I decided that, you know, it wasn't quite worth trying to make a lot more money just so that I could pay for physiotherapy. And so I decided to do much more freelance and consulting work. So since 2014, I was doing that. And that gave me the opportunity to spend time in Southeast Asia, to spend time in the places that I wanted to. So I was able to go to Japan for 1.5 years because I'd always wanted to live there. Return to Hong Kong for another 2 years, still doing consulting, doing a lot of remote work for clients. And then I spent time in Berlin at a conference. And I just really liked the tech scene here. And so I schemed my way into getting a job here. And also, again, by circumstance, I was introduced to someone who ended up needing a content marketing manager. And through a series of crazy kind of interviews in 2019, I landed in Berlin, finally, with a full-time job. And the visa that came with it. And have managed to hang in for all the months of COVID. So,
That's awesome. So all I want to talk about is like travel and everywhere you've been and eat, but like we can't really do that. We have to have another call to do that because I miss traveling. And I've been to a lot of the places you've mentioned, including Japan, and I miss travel. And so, you know, when I was looking at your kind of journey, it reminded me a little bit, you know, I was mentioning earlier, like I also moved between countries. Like I grew up in Morocco, moved to New York, Istanbul, Montreal, and it was like a thrill in moving around. And so was it, you know, I heard you use the word, you know, circumstantial, like, oh, I randomly met this person, but there's a pattern to your random encounter, which also speaks to your character and to how you interact with the world. And you know, not everyone can pack and leave and move to a new place. I think a lot of people would like to do that, think a lot about it. Very few people actually are able to just do it. And I want to talk a little bit about what was some of the triggers that you were like, you know what, I'm just going. And were you scared before making that decision? How did you build your confidence? What was talk to us about that like how you felt during that period?
Yeah, that's a great question. That was actually one of the questions that inspired me to start writing. I had a number of friends about 7-8 years ago who asked me the exact same question. And the honest answer is that at least to move to Hong Kong, that wasn't scary because I had grown up visiting Hong Kong. And so if anything, actually, I had the mistake of thinking that Hong Kong was familiar to me, and it was less so than I had realized. So it's the usual story of I had no idea what I was getting myself into and surviving it. And I think the biggest lesson from that really is that we survive ourselves, or at least I survived myself. And so I think that is what I constantly remind myself of, because I mean, you can be there's a lot of things we can be afraid of, but at the end of the day, I hold a Canadian passport. I have a university degree, and now I have job experience and such. And so what's the worst that can happen? Oh, I should also acknowledge that I don't have debt. I did not have to take out university loans. And so the worst that can happen is that I end up having to ask friends for a sofa to crash on, and I have done that before. And it's not comfortable, but it's definitely far better than a lot of people. It's nowhere on the scale of people who are migrant workers, for example, who are beholden to visas and other conditions. And so especially I think for your audience, many of the people dialing in are probably from Canada and the US. Like, I would just say, make use of your passport, especially if you hold a Canadian passport. You have access to use mobility visas. These are amazing. Just being able to have the privilege of saying, hey, I want to go to New Zealand. I want to come to Germany. I want to see what it's like. And all you have to do is it is still money. You still have to pay for the application and such. But for me being someone now in Germany on a job, if I did not have this job, actually, I would not be able to stay. And so if you can make use of a visa that gets you in the door, that's already something. And once you're in a city, you will be able to make use of it. So I would definitely say, I think the biggest step is always the mental hurdle. And the rest is actually leaning into what you don't know. It's actually to not worry about it, because when you're in the situation, you will find a solution. And if you don't find a solution, the people around you will help you find a solution.
Yeah, absolutely. So I love that, because I was born in Morocco. My first passport was Moroccan, and it was very hard to limiting to travel around, get anywhere. I grew up with two sides, sea, Mediterranean, and Atlantic, a border that's closed from both. So it's kind of like an island. And when I started traveling, I was like, oh man, I wish I could just go anywhere. And in 2015, I got my Canadian passport. And first thing I did is left the job, booked a flight, and went to Asia. Because I was like, after living, and definitely it is a privilege to have a Canadian or US passport or any European passports, right? And making the best out of it. And especially I think when you finish university, going through that experience of working other places is definitely an amazing experience. And as I mentioned, there's no reason to think about all the things that can go wrong, because you'll always find a solution, to the issues. And so, a lot of when a lot of people, a lot of companies now are offering more and more remote work, right? And people can work remotely. And, it happened during a pandemic, which you couldn't really go anywhere. This is the most frustrating. Well, actually, now we have remote company and you can go work anywhere. Good, thank you. I can only be at my home now. But the pandemic is hopefully will come to an end, and the option of working remote will stay here. Why do you think people should go and work remotely in other places?
Well, I think I always hesitate to say that it's just benefits, because ultimately it depends on everyone's character.
Yeah.
However, I think that there is a lot of value to opening up oneself to new experiences of working with people who think very differently, behave very differently, act very differently, and prioritize things differently. And there are so many things that you're going to pick up that will become natural to you because of your work experiences. Remote work is great for that, because overnight you could have an international team. And even, for example, with my Berlin company, the first one that I joined here, I think we had 40 nationalities represented, and we were not remote. Actually, we were mostly in the office, but the number of conversations that I could have were just amazing. So I think the argument for it is exposure, but also for everyone, especially today, and because we're talking to people who are interested in tech, then, I mean, why would you limit yourself to one geography? And based off of my limited exposure to Canadian companies, because I do go back to Canada often enough, and I do try to engage in companies that are there, for example, during Pride and doing recruitment and such. I think one of the beautiful things about remote working is that if you enjoy living in Canada, but you want to expand your product horizons, your team horizons, then that's a great way to go, because Canada is a particular market, and there's the EU market, there's the Asia market, and all of these markets have unique products that are just fascinating, at least to me. So that's a huge argument to do that. And especially if you like living in Toronto or Calgary or wherever you are, that you can just stay put, stay at home and enjoy the environment that you like, while having this access to this other part of the world in another way.
Yeah, absolutely. Another reason why I personally love live in other places is the food. I just love trying.
Oh yes,
amazing places, and I feel like yes. Do you have favorite like one? I mean, this is a very hard question because I wouldn't even know how to answer it. But do you have a favorite place in like Tokyo or Hong Kong or even Berlin that you're like, I just miss that restaurant or that type of food?
Yes, and disclosure, whoever's listening you're more than welcome to hate me for saying this, because I will sound like an absolute snob. I did get quite familiar with flying. So I got to the point where I could time my layovers so that if I had 8 hours in London, I had time to get from Heathrow out to Piccadilly Circus. I had my specific round. I went to Monmouth for coffee beans. I went to get my tea, and I went to potentially get actually my shirts, because I had a particular place that I like to get shirts.
Wow.
And then I'd get back on the plane. And by the way, those were actually also cheaper tickets. They're on BA, if anyone wants to try that. So I would definitely say yes. And that's the reason that I really enjoyed living in all the places that I did. It's that, there are dishes that I still miss in Hong Kong. Someone asked me, what are my favorite Chinese dishes? And I mean, China's a pretty large place, so I could list dozens. But, like Hong Kong, I miss the egg tarts, I miss the pineapple buns and such. And I actually like the feeling of missing places. I like the feeling of missing foods, because it means that there are other places that I feel connected to. There are other places that I respect and enjoy and appreciate for being very particular to themselves. And as much as I enjoy the conveniences of globalization, I think taking a step back, it's actually worth thinking about what can we enjoy about the specificity of a particular time and locale.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that. Yeah, there's so much that you discover also through food and through culture that I really love. So one aspect of living abroad and traveling, but in this case, going and living somewhere, is that, we feel safe in where we live. And, maybe for me, left Morocco because my sexuality was something that's not going to flourish, and that's probably dangerous in a way. And living in Canada, feeling, bringing my authentic self everywhere and feeling very comfortable in my environment, travel and go and live in somewhere, you think about risk and what would happen to my queer self in those environments. Do you think about your queer identity through the places you went to live in, and how did you carry it?
Absolutely. That's a great question. So when I said earlier that I went to Hong Kong and had a much bigger culture shock than I had anticipated, one of the things that I had not thought about, because I had gone to university in Toronto and had served at LGBT Out, so I was very involved in the university LGBTQ organizations. It just didn't, I was in my own queer bubble. And so when I went to Hong Kong, the first thing that happened was that in many ways I felt like I had to go back into the closet, or one that I never realized existed, actually. And so the first thing that my manager, when I got my job, did was she took me to the salon, and she got me a haircut, and she got my eyebrows plucked, which I had never done before. And I remember very consciously having to decide between, for example, the shirts that I enjoy wearing and not being, quote unquote, too masculine about it. Or finding this negotiation between what is my authentic self that I do want to bring to work every day, and at the same time masking it such where it can be interpreted differently. And so in the context of Hong Kong, and I would say East Asia, especially at the time, this was about 10 years ago, there was some protection in invisibility, as in people were used to women who wore suits or who wore shirts. And so they didn't necessarily immediately read someone who did as queer. And that gray zone gave me enough space to at least be myself, as long as I was not over the top, so to speak. So it is definitely something that I think about a lot, and I still think about to this day. And it shows up in all the small ways. So, it's conversations. When someone makes a joke, do you say something about it? And then it shows up in bigger ways, such as what do you wear to work? But at the same time, I think I'm in that stage in my life where I can say I'm not going to take it from a company that doesn't allow for that, and I'm probably still one of the people in companies that makes the most noise. But I definitely would encourage people to make whatever decision feels right to them at their stage in life. There's no absolute right. And I would also encourage people to think, not necessarily think in the binary of what is absolutely authentic, because whatever works for you in this moment is probably right for you, and that's okay.
Yeah, no, I love that. And Andy was sharing with us how there is this total code switching, but the authentic self-preservation. I love the way how he said that, because it's true, the context where you go change. For example, when I lived in Morocco and I had roommates who were LGBTQ, they will tell me man can just hold hands in Morocco or in Turkey while I lived there, right? And so you actually can hold hands with your partner in a way that's acceptable there, right? But you can't really talk about it. So it's really interesting to think about those dimensions, and I love that. So thank you for sharing that aspect. So we'll move a little bit from the fun conversation, which is always travel and food, to your career. And walk us again through a little bit. You finished university. We kind of understand your intentions with the studies you've done. and you moved to Hong Kong. Remind us again, what was the first job? Did you have a job before you got to Hong Kong, or you flew there and then you looked for a job? And what was it?
Yeah, what I did, I would not recommend to anyone because I was so clueless, and in my university bubble, I did not realize I graduated during a financial crisis. So yeah. I entered Hong Kong in 2009 and without a job, to answer your question. And I thought it was very strange that I was not finding a job in a month. In retrospect, I wonder why. Yeah. So I did what a lot of expatriates do in Hong Kong and East Asia. I taught English. And I lucked out in the sense that I did not have a TEFL. So I didn't have a teaching English as a, I think, foreign language certificate. So that automatically ruled me out from a lot of the mainstream education centers. And the reason I say that it was fortunate is because I realize I'm extremely opinionated about how people should or should not teach or support young people to begin with. Yeah. And so I landed in this very small family-owned learning center that was very atypical by Hong Kong standards. So it was much more oriented around what works for young kids rather than, checking off all the boxes. And so I was teaching. It paid very well, actually. And that's what a lot of people end up doing in Asia. They take a very high-paying teaching job that, to be honest, I think is quite a dead end as far as career is concerned, unless you really enjoy teaching, and by all means do that. And then they have a comfortable material life, and then they're kind of bored, and then they get very cynical, which is incredibly unfortunate. I became very angry, mostly because I was upset about how I felt the education system was actually killing the creativity of the young people that I was working with. And I don't believe in complaining about things if I'm not going to be part of the solution. So instead, I channeled that energy into a relatively new platform at the time, which is TEDx. And now TED and TEDx have become massive. But at the time, when we were promoting it in Hong Kong, people were like, TED? Who's TED? And so it was a pretty long education process. And so I co-founded it with the person who's now my mentor, actually. She's I think she's in her 50s. Even by the time I met her, she had worked in listed companies and had sat as a CEO for more than one company. But she was running a small NGO at the time, a local NGO that worked with Hong Kong's schools. And we both went through hell organizing the first one because it was quite a rough ride. And that's my tip for anyone, actually. If you can, just do what you want with the people that you want, go through hell, and two things will happen. Either you will never speak to that person again and be happy about that, or they will become your best friends for life because they've gone through the pits of hell with you. Yeah. And so we did that together. I went to London, and then I wanted to do a degree. I wanted to work actually in international development because I felt that I suddenly realized that a lot of the problems that I was facing was very first world problems. And by extension, a small minority of the world. And I wanted to do something that impacted more people. And because I could not stay in London, I returned to Hong Kong. But Hong Kong is also one of the worst places to do international development. It has one of the greatest inequalities of any city in the world. But because of the person that I had accidentally invited to that conference, I ended up in one of the only NGOs. Actually, the only NGO.
Accidentally invite the person?
Good question.
A couple of times, like, how did that happen?
How did that happen? Was it really an accident? And so basically what happened was I had free tickets to a women leadership conference. And I try to do this as much as possible. Whenever I have access to things, I try to give it away to whomever I think would be, would benefit from it. So I basically sent to a bunch of friends. And actually, she was really an accidental email in that it had autofilled in Gmail. And I didn't even realize until she responded to my email. And I was like, who is this person? And she said she wanted a ticket. and I was like, I don't know who you are, but sure. And then when we met, then she was just like, yeah, like, I mean, let's have a lunch. So we did, and I ended up in impact investing. And that's how I actually got into the startup and tech scene very heavily, because impact investing at the time was so small that within about 2 events, I had met every social enterprise and nonprofit at the time that you could in Hong Kong. And none of them were investable by our private equity board standards. And so I had to get creative because we're an investment NGO, so we needed to make investments. And so I started heading into the tech and startup scene because I decided, hey, if we're looking at the social sector and they are not, at the time, financially savvy enough, you could say, then why don't I head the other direction and go to the startup? So the people who know how to make money, but just find the people who have, you know, a heart and interest in social and environmental well-being. And that actually turned out to be easier. So I hung out at a lot of startup events, a lot of hackathons, made friends with a lot of now founders of Hong Kong's earlier tech scene, and stayed in touch with them. I mean, we had and still have great conversations about everything from hiring to funding to product development and design. And because I built those relationships very early on, down the road a few years later, when I was doing content marketing, it was these same tech founders who came back to find me because they already knew me. They knew that I actually knew product. They knew I understood what they meant when they were talking about front end or back end. And so they trusted me. And I was also genuinely interested in their products and their services, so I could translate their value from, you know, engineering language to something that the average, let's say, salesperson in a company could understand. That's my very long and roundabout.
It's great. And thank you for the details, right? I love that because it's easy just to say, I met someone and I did a TEDx and like, it turned out well, like, right? Like, is explaining, there is 2 things, right? Like I'm hearing is, one, there is perseverance, right? You're going to have to do something and try it again and again. And, you know, your first TEDx is tough. And I can tell you doing things the first time is always so hard because you know, and I'm familiar organizing even the job fair, like you think, oh, these are the things I'm going to do. And then every step, it's like another 25 steps that gets you another two. And so there's a complexity, but it's really perseverance. The second one is mentorship, right? And like how you adopted this person become a mentor. And it's something that we talk more and more about, and the importance of mentorship, but people don't, you know, don't really actively look for mentors or don't know how to. And so did you realize from the beginning this person was your mentor? Like, this is a great example where you met someone, you felt inspired, you kept relationship, and then you kind of start looking up to them. So how was there a moment where you were like, oh, this is a mentor of mine? Or how would you define a mentor for people?
That's a great question. And you're right. I think a lot of people may come to this idea a little bit later in their life. So I was lucky. I think I had 2, at least, very, very solid mentors earlier on in my life. So my first one was actually in high school. And I was in a badminton team. And she was actually a social worker and a youth worker specifically. And so she was also my coach, and she sponsored me and many other of my peers by giving us kind of part-time coaching opportunities and then coaching us through being coaches. And she did this in a very natural way. So we didn't really notice it at the time. But now looking back, I would say she was very much a mentor in that she was someone who held me. She did the things that I look for in a mentor, which is that firstly, you establish the trust that this is someone that's interesting to you and interested in your well-being. That she sees something, or they see something in you that you may or may not see in yourself. And the third one that I think is incredibly important is that they hold you accountable. So it is someone that you have to respect it enough so that you care when they say they're disappointed in you. And I think, at least for her, she definitely did oftentimes, and said things very bluntly. And so I think that very early on in my high school life, I already grew accustomed to this feeling of being disappointed maybe in myself because I had disappointed someone else, but then working through emotionally that feeling of where's this disappointment coming from, and can I channel it in such a way where I can improve and grow as a person, and not just to please someone, but truly for myself. And I think where a person becomes a mentor is when they are also intentionally doing it in such a way where it's not about, you pleasing them. It's that they are here to hold a mirror up to you. And because they have the benefit of experience, that they can also kind of help you along the way if you want that help. And so that was the first one. And that very much primed me for the second one that I met. She was actually a family friend. And so we met once because the family friend was like, oh, you two are in education, you should meet. So I did meet her, and literally just came up to her office, had a conversation, got super passionate about talking about TEDx. And it turns out she had actually been to TED, and she was the one who suggested TEDx for youth specifically. So it just clicked. We both had the same vision and we found that out within 15 minutes of meeting each other. And I had brought her back into the TEDx event that I started. And the reason I think we became such a good team was because we realized after surviving the event together separately, we didn't know each other super well at the time. So we were both just trying to be accountable people. But both of us actually saw that it would be a train wreck from the first time we met the organizers, actually. And both of us, because we had felt guilty, I felt guilty for troubling this person who's like a CEO and super important, and she felt guilty because she had committed to this at the time young woman who was really I don't know, impressionable. And it was only after, when we confided in each other, that we both realized, oh, we both had that moment of this is going to be bad. And so you learn something about someone else and what they're committed to. And so I suppose, to circle back to the question of how do people find mentors, because I happened upon both of mine, like I can't give like a specific formula to it, but I generally would say that I have encountered all the people that I have needed to meet in my life have entered my life when I needed them. Not because I was intentional about it, but because I think I just go out there and just do what I want to do. And when I do what I want to do, by extension, I meet the people who have a similar mindset. And if they can survive the same conditions, then we are more likely to get along. In terms of mentorship, the formality of the second one became more obvious actually when she acknowledged it. She said at some point in one of our conversations that she said, I think as your boss, as your friend, and even as your mentor, something like that. So she acknowledged it. And that's when it kind of hit for me. But I definitely always had that feeling that she was both friend and boss that I really respected. And I think there has to be that.
Absolutely.
And and I would say the one maybe magic component, at least in my case, for my dynamics with my mentors, is deep admiration, but not too much reverence. So I make fun of my mentors a lot. And I
that's a great relationship, right? When you're comfortable enough to have that means you also have an authentic relationship. So you're authentic to yourself with them and them with you.
And I think thinking about it this way, you also have to bring something to the table. Even if that is just freshness. But if there's nothing, I mean, I don't mean it, in a calculating way, but if there's nothing in that relationship for the other side, then at some point it's very one-sided.
Yeah.
And if nothing else, can you bring the joy of having meeting minds?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. That was great. And we're definitely thinking, even with QueerTech in the future, to have a mentorship program. We're asking people, are they looking for a mentor? And I'm interested in the topic because I think a community like ours doesn't really mentor that often. People don't find mentors. I ask a lot of people who have experience. I'm like, hey, do you want to be a mentor? And they're like, I don't even know how to be a mentor. So there's a lot of work on even like, what is that expectation? So thank you for sharing that perspective. I want to jump and, I look at always the time runs out. I want to jump into your career today. You live in Berlin and you are a B2B content marketing manager. What does that mean for people who don't know?
Yeah, exactly. So a lot of people know content marketing in the context of like social media marketing manager, content marketing from a B2C perspective, so a business to customer perspective. So that would be, for example, travel. So if you have travel magazines, travel platforms that are writing content for the average consumer, that is a particular type of content marketer. That is not my type of content marketing, although that's where I started. So B2B is business to business content marketing, which means that I am creating content for businesses that serve other businesses. What does that mean? That means companies like Shopify, companies like Salesforce, companies like Twilio, and then of course Passbase. So when I'm doing content marketing, I am thinking about what can I share that is of value to other business/company clients. So I'm not trying to necessarily create a viral campaign. Because there's only so many businesses out there. What I'm trying to do when I'm creating content is I'm trying to build trust. I'm trying to build authority for my company so that the people reading our content actually feel like, hey, these people are giving us real information that's actionable, that's useful. And through that, to help them along in their decision-making process, such where if they decide that our service is suitable for them, that they buy it. That's ultimately the goal.
Absolutely. This is really good. So I want to talk about, so there is a lot of queers that maybe have not studied business, have not studied marketing, but they've done literature, they've done writing, they're very good writers. They feel like removed from the business world and the tech world. And in this climate, maybe they're thinking to change their career. Do you think can you become a content writer by bringing your writing skills with you? Can you do it for any industry? Like, how do you become like a B2B content marketing manager?
Good question. So the great news is I have a humanities degree. I minored in English literature. I am still a literature reader. So the short answer is yes, you come from humanities, you can totally get into this field. And I can say, I cannot speak for everyone, but I can say that when I recruit, I actually look for people who can write. I do not actually care if you come from tech. I care about two things. I care about whether you are able to use language effectively, and that is not the most verbose words, that is clearly. And then the secret sauce that I am looking for is whether you're able to understand things. And this is where I would say 90% of people, be they from computer science or from English lit, fail. And they fail because, not because they're not intelligent, but because I think a lot of the times in this day and age, we're pressured to come up with what seems like the fast answer. And I'm not looking for a fast answer. I am looking for you to have the curiosity to truly understand something. So what do I mean by this? Let's say if I was talking about what I referenced earlier, like front end and back end. If I am giving you a job or a task, this is actually real. If I was screening you, I would probably give you a topic and ask you to write maybe a simple listicle for it. And for example, like, how do you differentiate front end and back end? Is JavaScript front end or back end? When I am referring to databases, is that back end, for example? And maybe I even give you a trick question. Like maybe the answer is actually like it could be both or it could be neither. But what I want to see is that someone has, firstly, honestly, just knows how to use Google, because you can Google almost all of this information. And then just whether you can express it. And so, you can come into this field without having specialist, even when we say specialist IT knowledge, but you actually have a specialty. You have a specialty in writing. You have a specialty in words. And so use that specialty to your advantage, but always bring in the humility of wanting to know something. If you want to know something, then you will probably be able to express it to someone else. And that's my key tip. So definitely spend the time to learn the language for tech.
Wonderful.
And that's about it.
I'm going to get to my final questions because unfortunately it's 51, but I feel like we can talk all day. I have so many topics we can cover. As a writer, and also as a queer person, when you are writing your B2B marketing and your content, do you think about your queer self? Do you think about the language you're using and how your queer self impacts your job and your writing?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say I actually had this conversation with a good friend of mine from undergrad just the other day. They asked me, would I want to be anything other than queer? And I was like, no, it's it doesn't make life easier, but it makes it a lot richer. And so I would say that my queerness has by default helped me not be bound by rules. And so I'm usually thinking about possibilities. I'm not thinking about, I never think about things as, things have always been this way or things should be this way because my existence should not have happened anyway. And so how does this come out at work? Actually, this came up the other day when I was arguing for greater sensitivity to the language that we're using at work. There's a word that even I have been guilty of using, which is, blacklist, whitelist. This is a term that is masked as professional business jargon, but in reality, it's a racist term. And so taking that step back and thinking about, okay, how do we use language to correct for the things that we should? And I sent a list into our company Slack channel, and another colleague had looked through it and found this exact same list, or found the exact same term. And so she was like, oh, we should use allow and deny list. Can we change all of our terminology? And the whole company rallied around it. And so I would definitely say it doesn't make for easy conversations because you are often still the only person in the room making a case for why, for example, safety is important to have at work. Because a lot of people, this is usually the case for cis white males and heterosexual, who think that, of course this is a safe place. Yes, because it is for them. And it's not for most of us for many other reasons. So you do find yourself in these educational settings a lot. And just as a reminder, it's always okay to say, hey, not today. I find that a lot. I'm at my limit a lot. But on the days where I do have that energy, then I channel it through. And it pays off. It pays off when you hear that the company has hired their first trans developer, when they have modified their manifesto, when they have said no to a particular harassment case, when they have gender neutral washrooms. So these are all cases that I'm talking about that I had a hand in the companies that I worked in. When we set up Hong Kong's first makerspace, one of the things that I had said to the co-founder at the time was, he's like, oh yeah, we need to separate the female and the male. I was like, what? Like, I was just like, just slap both of them and just say gender neutral. I was like, it saves you the divider. You don't even have to have 2 rooms. And he was like, oh, that's a good idea.
Absolutely. So thank you. These are great recommendations. I just love these. I think a lot of people need that, to just think about that, right? Like, we can impact, we can bring our queerness in a lot of the work we do and impact the world around us. And sometimes it does take some energy, and hopefully we can support each other in doing that. One last question, and this is kind of like a question that came from Andy. And in a minute, are there any great resources that help you learn tech language and concepts?
I would say
tools,
Yes, I would say there are. Off the top of my head, the one that actually comes to mind for me right now isn't even directly tech related. It's Ally, A11Y, and that actually has more to do with accessibility for the web. So that's very specifically language based. But with regards to tech language and concepts, I remember that there are resources for wrapping your head around front end. I can fish those links up and send them over to you, because I think that would be really helpful just to see the see how things relate to each other. And I would say that there are certain developers that are also really good at parsing out ideas. Hanging out on platforms like Hacker Noon, for example, is good. And actually, don't be afraid to just deep dive into reading developer blogs. So for example, the likes of Coding Horror, that's been around forever. Yeah, there's going to be terms that you totally don't understand, but just click through and click through and click through and just see if there's something that you can relate to.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Athena. I mean, there is, again, so much to cover, but thank you so much for joining us today. I just loved your story, and thank you for being vulnerable and sharing yourself with us. I always like to think about what I learned, and there is 2 things really. Is you're someone who's courageous, and like going to places take that courage, and sometimes it's just we just have to do it, and not block ourselves. And there's just so much learning that comes from all this travel and perseverance, right? Like, things might be hard, and sometimes we just have to go through it. And if you can't, find a mentor to help you. Find someone who has experience and can guide you through it. So thank you for the advice, for the ideas, for the story that you shared with us.
Yeah, thank you for having me today.
Thank you. And as usual, we would like to thank our QT annual partners for their support: Sage, Unity Technologies, VanHack, SpaceSafe, BreedLife, and Local Logic. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Our goal is to tell more and more queer stories throughout this live stream and throughout all our social media. You can donate to QueerTech so we can continue to share so many stories today. And also, if you have any recommendations for a guest to come on QT Connect, please contact us at naufel@queertech.org. For the next episode, it's not going to be April 8th because we have a big virtual job fair to organize that day, and we're very excited for it. So we will skip the QT Connect, and the next one will be on April 22nd. Save the date, April 22nd at noon Eastern time. I'm really excited for our speaker that day. It will be Sean Lavelle. He's SVP and General Manager at Card Not Present at PaySafe Group. PaySafe is one of our partners, and we're really excited to have someone from their executive team to come and share their story, their careers, and their queer self. Thank you very much for watching us today, and looking forward to see you next time.